The chief executive invited me to lunch only to inform me that the company was heading in another direction. After creating the technology division from nothing, I was being replaced by the owner's nephew. "These things occur," I responded with a grin. Nobody suspected that I had already anticipated this for many months. "My name is David, I am 42, and for 11 years I have been the foundation of Riverton Manufacturing's IT system. Not that you would notice it from the corporate website or quarterly financial statements. I developed our network protection starting back when the company still operated on Windows XP and passwords were kept on sticky notes. I transformed a help desk team of 5 into a 30-person department that maintained 3 production plants around the clock. The machines never stopped in Milwaukee, and neither did I. I was not meant to stay there long initially, but took the position as a temporary solution after my divorce, something to occupy myself while considering the future. However, I excelled at it, exceptionally well, and at some point, those servers and networks became mine, not legally, but in every way that counted. The lunch meeting was held at Maxwell's, the type of establishment with white linens on the tables, where executives entertain clients they wish to impress. Not a typical spot for delivering bad news, but Peter Campbell, our CEO, always prioritized appearances. "David, you have been invaluable," he said as he sliced into his steak. "But we require new insights, someone with a vision for the future of technology." In other words, they found someone less expensive who would not challenge their decisions. The board tends to make poor choices. Henry Wells's nephew had just completed his master's degree at MIT, an exceptional young man focused on digital transformation. I gave a nod and took a sip of water. "Who is managing the transition?" Peter Campbell appeared relieved that I was not causing a scene. "You will have 6 weeks. We will make the announcement after the quarterly all-hands meeting." I signed the non-disclosure agreement he presented right before dessert arrived. He smiled and shook my hand, saying he understood that business decisions had to be made. Back at my desk, I realized my administrative credentials had already been downgraded and my name removed from the leadership team's email thread. They must have decided this well before lunch, most likely weeks earlier. That night, I found myself unable to sleep, not out of anger, although there was plenty of that, nor from fear of finding new employment, but because of what I discovered in the server logs from 3 months prior. There were minor unauthorized access attempts from an IP address I traced to the executive floor. Someone was probing into systems they shouldn't have known existed, examining my documentation, security measures, and contingency plans. It became clear they were not just replacing me, they were extracting everything I knew first. I relocated to Milwaukee 16 years ago, following Emily after our marriage. I left a stable security job in Minneapolis because she gained admission to graduate school here. We were young and full of ambition. I thought I would easily find something suitable. The divorce hit me unexpectedly. After 7 years of building our life together, there it was, papers on the kitchen counter. "We want different things," she said. No arguments, no warnings, just those words. When Riverton brought me on board, I was crashing on my brother's sofa. They needed someone to fix their collapsing network after a ransomware attack. Initially, I was meant to be a temporary solution, but I recognized the opportunity. These manufacturing experts were skilled with machines but struggled with computers. Their whole operation involved millions of dollars worth of equipment and supported hundreds of jobs, yet it depended on outdated technology, one failure away from catastrophe. I proposed to Peter Campbell a 5-year renovation plan. He approved my budget and allowed me to work freely for 3 years. I hardly saw the sun, rebuilding every network, training the staff, and establishing backups, along with fail-safes. When the Northeast blackout occurred, we were the only facility in the area that remained operational. The board took notice, and Peter began involving me in meetings. My budget increased threefold, and I assembled a team of talented people such as Vanessa, who became my trusted assistant, and Luke, who could solve any coding challenge. We were no longer just the IT department. We were the reason Riverton could guarantee clients they would never miss a deadline. Henry Wells, the majority shareholder, shook my hand at the company Christmas party in 2019, telling me you transformed us into a modern enterprise. He added expansion would not have been possible without your systems. I felt I had finally found a place where I was important. The first sign of trouble came last September, When an unplanned consultant arrived to review our digital setup, he asked simple questions about systems I had designed personally. When I inquired about who approved the audit, he mentioned the executive team and then changed the subject. Then my access to the board meeting minutes vanished from the shared drive after the server cleanup was explained. I read that in December, Peter began canceling our weekly briefings, always with a plausible reason. Around the new year, during the leadership retreat, I overheard Henry talking about his nephew graduating. He said the young man was amazing with technology and that Silicon Valley companies were competing to hire him. At the time, I did not pay much attention to it. The final confirmation came when Vanessa mentioned being invited to a strategic planning session I was supposed to lead. When she brought up my name, Peter quickly changed the topic. Something felt strange, as if they were making plans without me. I ignored it, too loyal for my own good, as my ex often said. 2 days after that lunch, I was in the server room at 7 in the evening, long after most people had left. The steady hum of the machines always soothed me. The rows of servers, blinking lights, and cooling systems were my domain. I had carefully chosen every part and designed the backups. This was my place. Running my hand along the main console, I thought about the 11 years of my life hidden inside these walls working late. Then I turned and saw Luke Blake, Henry's nephew, standing in the doorway. He looked sharp with an expensive watch and an air of casual confidence, no older than 30. "Just routine checks," I said. "Do you need anything?" He stepped in as if he already owned the space. "Peter mentioned you would be showing me around soon," he said while examining the servers. The setup was impressive, although it felt a little outdated. Classic old school, but dependable. Old school that I had improved about 8 months ago. "Your documentation is very detailed," he went on. "I have been reviewing your protocols and have some suggestions for updating them," he said, as if he was doing me a favor. I was eager to hear what he had to offer, but the words left a bitter taste like chalk in my mouth. After he left, I settled at my workstation and opened the access logs. Nathan's credentials had been created 3 weeks before my lunch with Peter Campbell. He had already been granted top-level administrator access and had browsed through my entire documentation archive. I grabbed my phone and messaged Luke, "Can you meet tomorrow before work for coffee at Joe's at 6:30?" Later that evening, I drove down to the lakefront, parking at the spot where Emily and I used to watch the sun disappear over the water. The lake was dark under the cold winter sky, and I reflected on the day when Peter had made me director. He told me, "You are the backbone of this place. We could not operate without you." As it turns out, backbones can be replaced too. Luke was already sitting in the coffee shop when I arrived the following morning, his eyes shadowed by fatigue. He could tell something was amiss. I told him plainly, "They are phasing me out." Without hesitation, he nodded in understanding. "I guess they had been asking strange questions and making me explain your systems over the past few weeks." He looked down at his coffee and said softly, "I am sorry, man. I should have told you." I held no resentment. Luke had a family and a mortgage. "What is your plan?" he asked. I had not realized I had one until he brought it up, but as I sat there, I began to consider my next move. Observing the early morning crowd rushing by the window, something settled deep inside me, a clarity I had not experienced since receiving Emily's divorce papers. "They assume everything rests in the documentation," I said softly, "but we both understand it does not." Luke leaned forward, discussing the proprietary tools and the workarounds. I nodded, recalling the patches I had created that did not appear in any manual, the custom monitoring system, and the client interface that no one else completely grasped. "David, I am not going to undermine anything," I stated, "but I will not hand over what belongs to me either." Luke studied me carefully for a moment and then nodded. He had understood. "I need copies of all the work I have personally developed," I said, "and I have to know who remains loyal." The official announcement came during the company-wide meeting the following week. Peter stood confidently at the podium, speaking about exciting changes and new perspectives, with Nathan standing beside him and offering polite smiles at the right moments. "David has played a crucial role in building our IT infrastructure," Peter announced without making eye contact with me, "and we appreciate his efforts as he aids the switch to Nathan's leadership over the next 6 weeks." A ripple of whispers passed through the crowd. Most of the IT team appeared stunned. Vanessa's eyes met mine from across the room, silently asking a question. I gave a barely noticeable nod. After the meeting, I requested a private discussion with Peter and HR. I pointed out that numerous systems Nathan would assume control over were products of my work developed outside the usual framework. During regular work hours, I used my own development framework. The employment contract was straightforward. Diane from HR slid a document across the table. Anything created while you were employed belongs to the company, nothing more. I pointed out that the system's sync interface had been developed before I started at Riverton. I had licensed it to the company, but kept ownership rights. It was explicitly stated in the original agreement. Peter shifted uneasily and said, "That was 10 years ago. David, the company has grown, and so has System Sync. Every update, every integration was built upon my initial code." I leaned forward and said, "I was not trying to cause trouble, but I deserve fair payment for my intellectual property." Peter and Diane exchanged looks. "We will investigate the matter," Peter finally replied. "Meanwhile, please focus on transitioning with Nathan." I recognized that look. They were deliberately delaying. The following morning, my access to the development servers was suddenly limited. The automatic email said this was due to security protocols during transition periods. Nathan then called a team meeting without inviting me. I showed up regardless. He seemed irritated, but quickly covered it, saying, "David, glad you could join us. I was just explaining some changes to the network setup." I leaned against the doorframe and asked which setup. "Specifically, the main production floor systems," he responded confidently. "We are going to simplify the protocols." I replied calmly that those protocols are designed to prevent machine breakdowns during peak usage. They were custom built for our needs. David's expression grew tense as he considered the equipment. Modern systems do not require such complicated alternatives. "They are not merely workarounds," Vanessa interrupted, "but essential adjustments tailored for our unique hardware. Peter Campbell engineered them following the failure in 2018. The room became quiet. David's confidence faltered briefly. Then he said, "I understand the past context, yet we must proceed with streamlining," and he turned to the whiteboard, effectively dismissing me. Later that day, I received a message from legal stating the company was claiming full rights over all systems, including System Sync, citing a clause that integrated technologies automatically become company property. They offered me a technology acquisition bonus of $5,000. The real betrayal happened the next day when I found out David had set up individual meetings with every member of my team. These were not transition talks, but full job evaluations. He was deciding who would remain. Luke messaged me later, saying David asked if our systems were truly essential or just unnecessarily complicated, probing for criticism. That evening, I saw an email from a supplier in my personal inbox. They were confused about the new licensing agreement sent by Riverton, something I had never heard of. I opened the document and saw that Peter Campbell had signed a contract transferring all my custom supplier integrations to a third-party vendor, a startup, started by David's former classmate. They were not simply pushing me out. They were tearing apart everything I had created. Trying to access the backup servers to retrieve my original code, I discovered my credentials had been completely revoked. The game was on. I needed leverage quickly. Riverton had not been careless. They had been deliberate. As I pieced together the timeline, it became evident that Nathan had been involved months earlier, analyzing my systems and preparing to replace me while extracting all the knowledge I had. That night, I reached out to Darren Phillips, a network security expert I had worked with years ago. We met at a roadside diner, the kind of place executives like Peter Campbell would never dare enter. "Legally, you are in a tricky position," Darren said after hearing everything. "But there is something strange here. Why remove you now if the company is doing well?" I admitted I couldn't make sense of it either. "Let me do some digging," he offered. "Just gathering information, nothing invasive." 2 days later at 11 p.m., Darren called me urgently. "You need to see this," he said. He had uncovered SEC filings revealing Riverton was preparing for acquisition. TechCore Industries, a manufacturing conglomerate based in Boston, was in advanced negotiations to purchase the company. The deal depended on Riverton proving modern, technological infrastructure and transitional leadership. Darren explained, "They are cleaning house to boost the sales appeal, and your systems are a key selling point. The valuation specifically highlights the proprietary manufacturing management interface, your System Sync." "There is more," David continued. Henry Wells sold most of his shares last quarter. The acquisition would mostly benefit Peter Campbell and the executive team. They received golden parachutes and leadership roles at TechCore. What truly upset me was not the acquisition itself, but discovering emails that revealed Peter and Henry had planned to replace me over 6 months ago while I was working late nights fixing a major security breach. They were already interviewing Nathan. I drove to the old industrial park where I first drafted the system sync architecture when it was just a concept. I stayed in my car until dawn, watching the sky turn gray over the deserted warehouses. When I got home, I found an old external hard drive in my closet, plugged it in, and located what I had been searching for, the original system sync code from before Riverton. There was documentation proving I started working on it 8 months prior to joining the company. I also uncovered emails with Peter, explicitly asking me to integrate system sync with Riverton systems, acknowledging it was my proprietary software and promising that ownership would be formalized once things settled down. I had trusted him and felt betrayed. The next day, Nathan called me to a meeting with Peter and Diane from HR. Peter said plainly, "We are speeding up the transition. Your last day will be next Friday," giving me only 2 weeks instead of 6. I asked if there was a specific reason. Diane replied smoothly and directly that Nathan had shown exceptional capability. "Your demeanor has not exactly made the handover process easy," I nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that you will need to finish all the paperwork and training by Wednesday," Peter added. Naturally, I responded firmly, taking full responsibility for system sync. "Have you had a chance to examine the initial contracts?" Peter's face grew stern. "Our legal department has concluded that all integrated systems are owned by the company. The separation offer is generous, David. I advise you to accept it." I stood up and said, "I will have my attorney review everything. Do not complicate this further." Peter cautioned that it will not alter the decision. As I left, I messaged Luke with Plan B for tonight. 7 hours later, Luke handed me a flash drive in the parking lot of a supermarket. He softly stated, "Here is everything you requested: original codebases, deployment logs, authentication keys." I expressed my gratitude and asked, "Why are you assisting me?" He met my gaze and replied, "Because they believe we are all easily replaceable." I spent the weekend carefully compiling all details: the original system sync code, the emails with Peter, the licensing contracts, and the timestamps proving I created the core technology before Riverton. On Monday morning, I arrived early and found Vanessa already at her desk, looking exhausted. "Have you heard of the rush schedule?" she inquired. I nodded. "How is the team handling it?" "Not well. Nathan held urgent strategy meetings all weekend, attempting to reconstruct your monitoring system." She lowered her voice and confessed, "It did not go smoothly. 3 warnings came in from the production area. Got them. Nobody was injured, but the production line had to be stopped. 3 hours of downtime meant losing about $40,000, and production halted." I kept my face impassive. "Sorry to hear that, David," she said. She paused. "I think I might be next. Nathan has been questioning whether my role is really necessary." I had already suspected something similar. Vanessa knew too much about the real inner workings. I whispered, "Do you trust me?" Without hesitation, she said, "Absolutely." I slid a sealed envelope toward her desk. "If anything happens this week, anything strange at all, open this. It will explain everything." That afternoon, I met separately with 3 patent lawyers and paid extra fees to file provisional patents. These covered the vital parts of system sync, not the entire system, but the critical elements that integrated it smoothly with manufacturing equipment. On Tuesday, I finished all the handover documents Nathan requested, attended his planning meeting, and answered questions politely as the perfect employee. Meanwhile, Darren was assisting me in setting up a secure server off-site. By midnight, I had moved all my original code there and created a standalone version of System Sync that could operate independently of Riverton's infrastructure. By Wednesday morning, I discovered an email in my personal inbox from TechCore Industries. They invited me to talk about shared business opportunities at their regional office. They had learned I was leaving Riverton and showed interest in my skills. Someone was clearly preparing for the future. I forwarded the message to my lawyer and waited for what would come next. I contacted TCOR's Vice President of Operations and proposed we meet once I officially left Riverton. He readily agreed. That very evening, I put the crucial part of my plan into action. Using the access credentials Luke had saved, I updated 3 vital elements of system sync. I implemented digital signature verification to ensure the code could not be altered by unauthorized individuals. I also changed the license so it would expire exactly 8 days after my formal departure. This created a legitimate transition path, allowing the system to keep running if a valid licensing agreement was signed. There was nothing harmful or destructive in my actions, just a way to safeguard what was rightfully mine. On Thursday, Nathan called me into his office. "Some team members say you have been acting strangely," he said. I asked if there was anything I should be aware of, and explained I was simply finishing up my tasks. He eyed me suspiciously and said, "Tomorrow, we are going to change all system passwords and access credentials after you leave. It is standard procedure." I agreed that made sense, but reassured him it would not impact System Sync's core functions. The system was designed to operate independently of any admin changes, which was the whole point. He seemed unsure whether I was a threat or just informative, but he picked the wrong assumption. "I think we are good here," he concluded, and dismissed me. As I left, Peter Campbell passed by in the hallway and barely gave me a nod. 11 years had passed. By midnight, everything had been set up perfectly. I sent one last email to my private server with the verification code, Alpha 7 complete, and the countdown had officially started. On Friday morning, I handed in my badge and completed the exit documents. I declined the farewell lunch that Nathan had planned, much to Peter Campbell's obvious relief. While I was heading to my car, Luke contacted me and said, "It is done. Nathan just altered all the administrator passwords. They are conducting a comprehensive system review this afternoon." I thanked him, keeping my tone steady, and asked, "What happens now?" He replied, "Now we wait." I spent the weekend at home, ignoring incoming calls from unfamiliar numbers, and slept more peacefully than I had in months. At exactly 9:17 on Monday morning, the production floor reached peak activity. Every instance of System Sync across all 3 of Riverton's facilities displayed the same alert. License expired. Please contact the developer to renew. By 9:20, the first production line stopped. By 9:45, all 3 locations were completely offline. At 10:30, Peter called me directly. "What on earth did you do?" he demanded, trying to sound in control, but I could hear his alarm. I answered calmly, "I did nothing. The software license expired. As the developer and owner of System Sync, I am open to discussing renewal terms." "This is sabotage," he hissed. "It is standard license protocol," I corrected him. "Check the original integration agreement from 11 years ago. Clause 7 clearly says Riverton was licensing the technology, not purchasing it." The line was silent as I informed them that I had sent a formal licensing agreement to their legal department. I explained that the conditions were straightforward: acknowledgement of my ownership, fair compensation for ongoing use, and a confidentiality clause regarding the details of my departure. They called it blackmail, while I saw it as standard business. I responded by saying these situations happen. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, their attorneys had examined my documents, and by 5 o'clock, the contract was signed. 3 days later, I found myself sitting opposite TechCore's Vice President of Operations in their downtown office. He pushed a contract across the desk and said, "We are still taking over Riverton, but we want you to manage the technical integration as a consultant rather than an employee. The salary offered was double what Riverton had paid me, plus full autonomy over when and where I worked." When I asked about Nathan, the vice president's face became a little tense. He said, "Mr. Blake will be moving on to other ventures." I signed the contract that same afternoon. 2 weeks passed, and Luke contacted me with news that Nathan had been quietly ousted from his role. The public explanation was that he pursued other opportunities. The real reason, however, was that 3 key clients had threatened to cancel their contracts following repeated system breakdowns. Peter stayed on as CEO after the acquisition, but his position at TechCore was mostly symbolic. No real authority, no team to lead, simply a prestigious title and an office far from the decision-makers. I did not experience the vindication I had expected, just a calm certainty that I had done what needed to be done. The next month, I used my first consulting paycheck to make a down payment on a small cabin by the lake. Nothing elaborate, just a peaceful spot with a deck facing the water, where I could watch the sun set and rise. Vanessa joined my consulting team 3 months later, and then Luke came on board. Before long, half of my former department was working alongside me, not under me, but as partners in a growing venture. About a year after everything happened, I ran into Peter Campbell at a downtown restaurant. At first, he turned away, then paused and approached my table. "You won," he said simply. I looked at him closely, noticing the stress around his eyes and his slightly disheveled suit. He had aged. "It wasn't about winning," I answered with intention. "It was about value, understanding your worth." He nodded once and then walked away. I stayed there for a long while, watching the city lights illuminate across the river, reflecting on systems, those we create, those we disrupt, and the ones that eventually endure beyond us all.